It's the Regular Expressions Podcast. Join Noah Heldman and Ben Griswold as they talk about technology consulting, AI, and more. In episode 32, Noah and Ben talk about Anthropic's latest model, Fable 5, and how it has already lived up to its name. It's a fascinating time for LLMs, and it feels like we are about to experience a pretty significant shift in model regulation. Here are the guys.
Hi, Ben.
Hello, Noah.
So, do you know what a fable is?
No, never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Well, I'll give you a definition. A fable is a short, fictitious story designed to teach a moral or practical lesson. So it's kind of interesting that Anthropic recently released its flagship model called Fable 5. It's not the only thing they did, but it didn't quite work out the way everyone hoped or expected it would. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your perspective on it.
Yeah, I'd say it's a bit longer than a fable. It's I was explaining some of this to my family over the weekend, and I realized that this is really playing out politically. Feels a bit like a soap opera in a lot of ways, but maybe we can just talk about the model itself for a bit, which was released early to mid last week. What we've seen in the benchmarks and LinkedIn posts and various podcasts, etc. And then our own experience, what we've discovered with the model itself, and see if we can just quickly address what those pros and cons of the model is.
Sounds good.
All right. Why don't we kick things off and what the model's really good at? All right.
Sure.
So far, seems like it's really good at long-running reasoning tasks. Excuse me. I'm hearing great things about one-shot prompting and getting long coding sessions to come back with really compelling results, which is promising. We don't get that from a lot of other models. And then agentic workflows. Supposedly, it's really strong with the agentic workflows, though I haven't tested that part on my own.
Yeah. One thing that kind of stuck with me just in looking at the benchmark list, which can you trust any of the benchmarks? Hard to say. But the best I think you can do is look at how the percentages change over time. And looking at Anthropic's official benchmark list, you mentioned reasoning. So the spatial reasoning of a specific kind, the Opus 4.8 model was 14.5%, and it's now 38.6%. That's a massive jump, but it's also 38.6%. Where if you look at the agentic coding, that's above 80% now in Mythos and Fable. So clearly, we know a lot of investment has gone into the agentic coding side of things. It's kind of where all of this started with AI and LLM capabilities. But it does illustrate that there are still huge gaps to cover in a lot of really critical areas if we're thinking about, AGI is just around the corner. Maybe it is because we get a snowball effect, but maybe it's still quite a bit in the distance because these percentages are harder to come by with each new model release.
Yeah. It reminds me of folks that compete at the, weekend level. They're training, a few times a week. They run a marathon eventually after a long training program versus those elite marathoners. It takes a great amount, of course, disciplined training time to run a marathon. But in order to squeak those last few seconds out of your own personal best, it takes about that same amount of time and discipline. You've got to really double down. And so I agree with you that the model performance, those benchmarks will perhaps increase slowly going forward. We might not see doubling in a lot of those measures, but with models, agents doing a lot of what's being coded over at Anthropic today, maybe we will see those gigantic boosts in performance. We're just going to have to wait and see how this soap opera plays out.
Well, one interesting thing, just in looking at this same set of benchmarks, is the cybersecurity benchmark with Exploit Bench. And Opus 4.8 got a 40%. The Mythos 5 and Fable 5 got a 78%, almost double in that space, which is kind of part of the big news about this whole thing. So it's fascinating that you get this massive jump in cybersecurity capabilities. And we had some missteps, let's say, with how the model got released and how long it was available for people to use. Can you talk a little bit about that and what happened?
Yeah, well, I love what you just said about those benchmarks, Mythos versus what we have in Fable, right? It seems a bit disingenuous to me that they can both have that same cybersecurity benchmark when Fable is in fact restricting one asking questions specifically around that subject area. They might allow some through, for sure. I guess it's maybe 5%, maybe even less, of the questions that are actively refused. Like you get that message back when you're using chat within the Claude suite. So how could those have the same measure? It seems very unfair to do that, and that's one of the issues I've recognized with how Anthropic is marketing this model, specifically around the benchmark. So that's a big part of where my just around security at that top level and what was released, that is just a bit concerning. It's just they're not really comparing model to model.
And they really are kind of inflating their numbers. They do have the fine print under the little benchmark table on the website, and it calls out reported scores are within a 1 to 3 percentage point difference between Mythos and Fable. Okay. This table shows the higher score of the two. It's like, okay, great. Most people are going to look at the scores and say, cool, Fable is an 80+% in agentic coding. That's amazing. Yeah. And then in the fine print, it also says, for these benchmarks, Claude Fable performs closer to Opus due to fallbacks. So it's exactly what you're saying. They're going to punch it up to make it look as good as they possibly can. Yeah. It's still an improvement no matter what, but it's not much of an improvement if nobody can use it, right?
That's absolutely. And that's where I find some issue with this, where who can use this? Like, what are those use cases? Right? We talked about long-running reasoning tasks, right? Agentic workflows, one-shot coding. What percentage of folks are going to be using any of those scenarios day to day? Then you look at how many people are just priced out of using this model to begin with. It's comparable to what is currently or was the most expensive model, GPT 5.5 Pro, right? Now they're like neck and neck. Okay, I don't use ChatGPT 5.5 Pro almost ever. I can't afford it. So I'm wondering who is actually able to, if it was basically available, right? Who's going to start using this model, at the price point alone?
Well, and I think we're seeing an interesting potential breaking point in the industry overall. Every time a new model is released, it seems that the older models are kind of forgotten. There's just an assumption that the new one's going to be better than the old one. Now, there were some missteps with one of the Opus releases. I think it was 4.7 after 4.6, and everyone was saying, oh, it's worse now. What happened?
Right.
And 4.8 comes out, and that kind of just gets forgotten. So it's very much about the sexy new model. That's how this works. But what we're also seeing is the open source models making incredible leaps and bounds. So something like Kimi K27 comes out, it's benchmarked against Cursor's Composer 2.5, which has been one of my go-to models just because of the value. And Composer 2.5 is built on top of Kimi K2.5 with Cursor's own prompt wrappers and some fine tuning, I think. But now Kimi K2.7 coding model is exceeding Cursor Composer 2.5. So in my brain, I'm thinking, why am I paying for this model at all? And paying a pretty good monthly fee to get access to the best models, when if you just accept that it's maybe not the latest and greatest, but you may only be a month behind, that for free is a pretty big deal. Now, free is kind of a relative term, because the ability to process this on your home computer requires pretty substantial hardware, but it's probably less than $10,000, which is a good chunk. But for $10,000, you can have a GPU heavy system that can run some of these models pretty effectively, and you can, maybe not at the level of Fable or even Opus 4.8, but you can do some pretty impressive things. And then your data is yours. There's no cloud that your data is exposed to. You're not hostage to any of the major model providers. So they're putting out some really good open source models, and the frontier models are kind of creating that goal, that thing to aspire to, and people are showing up and getting there. So I don't know if you feel that with the open source models, where you kind of feel Anthropic and OpenAI and Google fitting into the overall landscape of where models are going.
A couple thoughts on that. We've talked about this for a long time. AI is a tool, right? It's part of your solution in order to meet a business concern, right? When you're picking your tool, it isn't just simply, I'm going to pick AI. I'm going to pick the greatest model. It's the right fit is really what you're looking at. And if you look at the stack of models that are provided by Anthropic, and we don't intend to pick on Anthropic here. Like, we could have a lot of these same arguments for any of the other model providers, but Haiku, Sonnet, Opus, and now Fable, right? It's provided, it's said by Anthropic. Like, these are the models you should be using based on your specific use cases. So chasing that shiny thing seems like not the right approach. It's not prescribed, that approach. Now, I love what you're saying about the open source models versus these frontier models. If in fact token usage continues to go up and what we're paying for it continues to go up, as well as things like some models now being covered models, so there's policies associated, right? We're gonna hold on to the inputs and the outputs of the Fable model for 30 days, and your private data is no longer private. It can be reviewed by human beings going forward. As you said, open source models, you don't have those constraints. You completely have ownership of all the ins, the outs, how big of a compute you want to put behind it. So it's awesome. I think that there's a real opportunity there for people to start, let me use an AI term, please, unlock the potential of the open source models. Yeah, I mean, you're paying more attention to it. I should probably pay more attention to the open source models, as it's going to be a great alternative for a lot of companies. Now, there is, I think there's a gotcha there, is that most companies aren't really paying a lot for AI today, right? There was a gigantic swing between big companies, big enterprise on the per individual, how much they're spending. There was, it's in the thousands of dollars for some companies, like the top 5% per individual. And it goes all the way down for other companies, like $11 per individual. So there's a giant swing on the token economics as well as what you're looking to put into a specific model. And just like we've experienced with a lot of enterprise clients over the years, nobody gets fired for hiring Microsoft, right? And it's going to be the same, I think, with the LLM providers, right? No one's going to get fired for Anthropic. You're going to, it's not a bad choice. You're going to have a level of support. You're going to have all the documentations, trained individuals, et cetera. So big enterprises can continue to get on that path, and it's the right path, honestly.
Yeah, you mentioned token economics, and I think that will continue to be a really big piece of the overall puzzle, not just making sure you are writing your prompts efficiently, but that the models you're leveraging have built-in prompt caching, and OpenAI and Anthropic are doing a really excellent job with this. Some of the open source models less so. So if you're going through something like Hugging Face and you're paying some amount for your input and output tokens, that can get blown up rather quickly with one of these models that doesn't have advanced prompt caching. So if you think about it like the old junior engineer example, or someone who's just really excited and ambitious and wants to show how great they are, but maybe overdoes it a little, does a write-up that's way more fluffy than it needs to be. It doesn't get directly to the point. Some of these models are doing the same thing. So how do we do that? We train it out of a junior engineer. It's like, here's an example of what you need to do to be concise and direct and get your point across. Do the same thing with an AI agent. We're seeing, as we've talked about many times, all of these principles that make human teams effective for now apply as much, if not more so, to AI. And all of the guardrails we put in place to make a company, especially a regulated enterprise, run smoothly, we have to add all those layers to AI to be able to trust it. That's the problem with non-deterministic LLMs. And we also have to remember what things are worth asking of a non-deterministic agent versus treating it as an algorithm, treating it as an automation that's based on known good patterns, equations, et cetera. So token economics is huge as we go forward.
Yeah, it sure is. And what you were saying just around using models, around the overall workflow, having your policies, having your validation layers, that's really important, right? Like you said, right? AI governance, like really tracking all those things, token economics. How much is this costing on a turn per turn when you're using AI models? What's the latency around leveraging these models? And I bring that up because I understand the time to first token for Fable is quite high in comparison to others, likely because it has quite a bit more reasoning. I'm not sure, but that was a call out in one of the articles I read. There's a give and take, right? Like, can I afford to have that happen? Maybe if I'm leveraging this for long running reasoning operations, maybe if it's for coding, if this is a production process, I might want to have that streamlined as much as possible. And by streamlined, I mean as quick as possible. Not sure.
It also changes the architecture for any of the agentic frameworks you want to build. None of it is responsibly synchronous by nature. If you're thinking about having, let's call a Lambda and let's just wait and let it run and crank up my Lambda costs, my serverless costs. No, you have to build in a queuing system. You have to understand how to pass these off to different architectures that are much more effective for those unpredictably longer running tasks. And your Lambdas are just entry points to the queue. So it does shift the architecture. It's not unlike just a lot of enterprise architecture where you're relying on queues and asynchronous types of calls. But we are seeing more advanced architectures around the AI limitations, or just the nature of how they're designed.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
lots of work to do there. But again, human patterns that we can apply, and we haven't really done so as much as we should yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you maybe kick off the conversation a little bit about that soap opera that I was mentioning, or as we kicked off the podcast? Where do you have opinions, thoughts, just how that's playing out? And I'm speaking specifically around the fact that Anthropic has just released, yes, we're going to say, yeah, we'll keep it at that for right now. They just released the world's most powerful model, right?
Yeah. And the timing is interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're pre-IPO. They haven't announced yet, right? It's just all the buzz around it.
I think intent, not dates or anything along those lines. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder what that looks like in terms of a shift at the point that goes IPO. Does it mean that we are commoditizing it and making it available for consumers because there's pressure to move prices down on models? Or does it mean that models become even more exclusive to the big tech companies that can pay for it, massive companies that are willing to invest billions of dollars in access to the latest, greatest models for all of their people? And for this, I go back to my comment about open source model capabilities, not completely keeping pace, but really not too far behind. Kind of drafting, if you'll go back to the running metaphor a little bit, they're drafting behind those models and picking up all the goodness along the way. There's a point at which it has to give. It has to become enough of a commodity, and there has to be enough of an advantage for paying these really high prices. And I think we've seen a taste of it with the covered models, with handicapping the models, which, from what I understand, Anthropic specifically puts some limitations so that other open source models couldn't distill some of the patterns they saw. So how does that translate, right? If you have unfettered access to the greatest model, you have access to Mythos, and you can do all these crazy cybersecurity things that are inherently dangerous, then you can draft off that model if you know how to do it. You can distill. So someone somewhere will always have unfettered access to the most powerful models. So it's got to go negative in some way sometime soon as a result of that. I just don't know what it looks like. A little scary.
Yeah. Great points. Just on the ability to distill the model, I thought it was quite interesting how Anthropic implemented those protections. And what they're doing is based on specific of certain prompts. They're recognizing them as, somebody's doing some extensive AI or model inspection. So we're going to silently degrade the response down to Opus 4.8 and return that to the unsuspecting user. Again, this is, how can you really compare the Mythos and Fable in the same column? It's not a fair comparison. I found that just releasing the most powerful model in the world, like, great marketing, great way to prop up your company prior to possible IPO. At the same time, though, Anthropic, Dario, publishes an article where he's stating that our advances in AI are dangerous. He essentially, in that announcement, goaded the government into paying special attention to these dangerous AI models and to intervene or consider how they could, in fact, put some AI governance and I'm overloading governance on that, and taking action. So what ended up happening, as you know, is that the government's like, okay, we'll step in, and almost as quickly as Fable 5 was available for general consumption, the government said, well, let's restrict this to foreign entities, please. Let's restrict this to foreign nationals, please. Anthropic first said, well, we can't do that, so let's restrict access to everyone. So Fable was available and then unavailable about as quickly as you can imagine. Again, soap opera. There's still some question on whether or not it was justified. The jailbreaks that may have been available through Fable might existed with other models. However, if you can jailbreak the most dangerous model in the world, that does seem to be a heavier concern to me than being able to jailbreak a less dangerous model. So I don't know. I think we're just in a whole new place when it comes to, maybe I want to say responsible AI. Maybe it's the government saying, well, we're being taunted by Anthropic. Maybe Anthropic is not adhering to some of the things that we wanted to use their model for to begin with. So maybe a little bit of retribution. The sky's the limit. You can go from soap opera to conspiracy theory. You could just look at the facts, which just, that's no fun. And see where we are today with IPO saying we're dangerous, and then government stepping in, and then no access.
I think it's a perfect time to close as we opened, given what you just said. So I started out saying a fable is a short fictional story designed to teach a moral lesson. The definition continues. It typically features anthropomorphized animals, plants, or natural forces, meaning non-human elements are given human speech, behaviors, and emotions to highlight human traits or follies. That name is on the nose, Fable. So really curious to see how this plays out. Yeah. And the next model, Anthropic Disaster 5.5.
Gosh. Perfect ending. Thanks for the conversation, Noah. We don't usually talk about the latest and greatest models, right? We usually reflect on something a bit more foundational. So this was really great. Good combo.
Yeah, really fun. Thanks, Ben.
All right. See ya.